Today, we turn our attention to a growing global concern, the vulnerability of undersea or subsea communication cables. These vital lifelines stretching across continents, carrying the data that powers our digital age, but they're increasingly at risk, not just from natural wear and tear, but also from something far more concerning, intentional sabotage. Last week, an international communication cable near Keelung Port and Yueliu in northern Taiwan was damaged. The culprit, a Chinese cargo vessel, Shenzhen 39, is suspected of dragging its anchor along the seabed. Experts, including today's guest, suggest the damage might not be an accident. We'll also explore a troubling pattern. From the Baltic Sea to the Indo-Pacific, similar incidents involving Chinese vessels have raised red flags among security experts. Taiwan is not alone in facing such incidents. In October 2023, two data cables between Finland and Estonia were damaged by a Hong Kong-flagged vessel registered in China. In November 2024, two critical Baltic Sea communication cables, one linking Germany and Finland and another connecting Sweden and Lithuania, were sabotaged. The main suspect was also a Chinese vessel. In December 2024, undersea power cable EstLink 2, which transfers electricity from Finland to Estonia, was damaged along with its grid. A Chinese commercial vessel was again implicated, prompting intense scrutiny from Nordic and Baltic nations. German Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock remarked that damages to subsea cables in the Baltic Sea occur nearly every month. National security experts stressed the need to enhance the resilience of subsea cables through inspections and preventative measures. They also advocate for a global punitive mechanism to deter deliberate infrastructure sabotage. The resilience of subsea cables was a key focus during the Taiwanese Presidential Office's Urban Resilience Exercise, which inaugurated in December 2024 and is expected to remain central to the committee's discussion in 2025. Now, are these isolated accidents, or are they part of a broader gray zone strategy? Join us as we talk about the growing need to protect these critical infrastructures and what international cooperation could look like in an era of increasing maritime tension. I'm your host, Joey Chou, and this is Beyond the Reefs. Hi, you're listening to Beyond the Reefs, a show produced by Radio Taiwan International. Here we talk about socio-economic issues that are faced by Taiwan and their broader impact around the world, beyond the reefs of this island nation. Well, today we might be talking about what's underneath the reefs as we discuss the act of sabotaging subsea data or electronic cables around the world by what seem to be a fleet of Chinese vessels. Our guest today is Professor Benjamin Schmitt, a senior fellow at the University of Pennsylvania and former U.S. State Department advisor on European energy security. Joining us to unpack this incident, he'll share insights into the strategic importance of these cables and why the stakes are so high, not just for Taiwan, but for nations worldwide. Let's first ask Professor Schmitt to introduce himself.
My name is Benjamin Schmitt. I'm a senior fellow at the University of Pennsylvania. I work at both the Department of Physics and Astronomy and the Kleinman Center for Energy Policy. And at the Kleinman Center, I teach and research energy security issues around the world. I have a focus right now, in particular, on European energy security because I worked in the past as European energy security advisor at the State Department. But I'm also focused on Taiwan, the cross-strait region in East Asia, insofar as it relates to energy security and in particular, energy and critical infrastructure protection, because we've been seeing more and more of threats emerge against energy and critical infrastructure in Northern Europe and also in East Asia.
So let's talk about this incident where the Chinese vessel using an anchor to damage cables. Which countries are these cables connecting and what purpose do they serve mainly?
So what we saw is several days ago on the 3rd of January, there was reports that the Shisheng 39, a Chinese-owned vessel that has a number of different flag states and IMO numbers associated with it. It's also sometimes called the Shunxing 39, and it has flags from Tanzania and Cameroon, but Again, the flag state doesn't really matter. It's the ownership. And again, the ownership is Chinese. The Ziyang Trading Limited Company out of Hong Kong, which actually had ownership start on this vessel just back in April of 2024. So this is a relatively new ownership scenario for this particular vessel. And what we saw were reports that there was a break in the Trans-Pacific Express cable system near the port of Keelung in the waters just north of Taiwan. That is a major trans-Pacific subsea telecommunications cable. It's mostly internet. It connects Taiwan to, among other countries, the Republic of Korea, to the west coast of the United States, to Japan, and a number of other locations. And so, whereas there is a significant amount of redundancy in these systems, meaning that this cable cut in particular did not knock out the Trans-Pacific Express cable system entirely or cut off communications to Taiwan entirely, it certainly is concerning because without that redundancy, or if more cables were cut, then there would be a significant potential for telecommunications outages across Taiwan.
Okay, I see. And you say there's some redundancy. Now, I'm curious, are there any cables connected to Taiwan or surrounding the Taiwan waters that do not have such redundancy that could be vital to the rest of the world?
Well, I think you'll see there's a lot of redundancy in many of these systems. There are a lot of telecommunications, subsea, internet, fiber optic cables connecting to Taiwan. I'm looking at a map as we speak and counting dozens of these cables. So there is a lot of redundancy. It's really important to have more than one connection, whether it's electricity, telecommunications, internet, anything. So that's a major mitigation effort to make sure that any sort of what's known as hybrid threats against critical and energy infrastructure in the offshore can be deterred and do not turn into a massive crisis.
Okay, so it sounds like damages like this have been predicted and there are backup plans for it, essentially. However, I'm curious, even with redundancy, when you remove one of the cables, does it affect bandwidth? And if so, does it still have some sort of socio-economic or purely economic effects on Taiwan and the world?
I think it can. I mean, it depends on the system we're talking about. From what I've read, and again, there's only so much information that's been released yet about this particular cable cut, but from reporting that I saw from Radio Taiwan International and other sources, Taiwanese authorities said that they're able to effectively reroute internet traffic to other of these cables and make sure that there wasn't a significant outage. But by definition, reduce bandwidth.
Yeah.
We certainly saw that in the case of the Svalbard cable cut. The islands of Svalbard near the North Pole that are Norwegian islands have two subsea telecommunications cables, subsea internet fiber optic cables, connecting Svalbard to the Norwegian mainland. There was a Russian quote-unquote fishing vessel that sailed over a particular location on one of the two of these cables over 140 times back in early January 2022, resulting in this cable being cut. Now, there wasn't a tremendous impact because there was two cables, but I think it would be incorrect to say that there are no bandwidth issues associated with it, but it didn't have a massive outage associated with that. And so I think you're seeing the same thing here with Taiwan with having that much redundancy.
I guess venturing into the realm of speculation, what do you think, in your very personal opinion, what do you think are the reasons for these kind of acts?
I think that a lot of the case, what's going on in Europe, I think is partial to Russia's hybrid warfare campaign against the West. I think it's frankly just warfare, maybe not even hybrid at this point. They seem very clearly interested in using deceptive tactics and quote unquote fishing vessels or quote unquote commercial vessels, some with Chinese ownership and flag state, to cut cables in the Baltic Sea, whether they're telecommunications cables or electricity cables. We saw just a few weeks ago on Christmas Day, the Estlink 2 electricity interconnector between Finland and Estonia get cut. And I think there is a strategic purpose to the timing of that because the Baltic states, Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia, are in early February planning on desynchronizing their electricity grid from the old Soviet system that they've been connected to. In other words, disconnecting from Russia and Belarus and connecting with the European Union system. And so that sort of operation always comes with risk, and reducing additional redundancy for grid balancing and things like this to other countries, like to Finland in this case, through the cutting of the Estlink 2 cable, that can put pressure on that system. But I think that in addition to that, what we're seeing both in the Cross-Strait region with this cable cut and in Northern Europe are Russia and China trying to basically put pressure on democratic societies and undermine democratic resilience, if nothing else, to basically make the electorates in those locations less certain that their authorities can protect them from threats against their critical infrastructure. And so I think that's absolutely part of the strategy. There's also a difference between accidents that happen with these cables and true incidents that have taken place that are clearly intentional. And that also makes it harder for Western authorities, for Taiwan, for Europe to come out very rapidly in some cases and say, we know for sure this was sabotage versus we know if this is an accident. And while that investigation takes place, because these are in remote locations, because the pathologies of these incidents are similar but all have their own sort of characteristics, it may be weeks or months before they can really ascertain whether this was a sabotage incident or an accident. And by that time, the impact of the incident has already taken place.
Right, exactly. And to be quite honest, it's a very small price to pay on their side. I mean, all you need is a vessel with a extended anchor, and you are able to cause disruption to potentially a lot of economic or even political fallouts, especially if it's well coordinated.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what sort of intelligence do you think would be required to actually target infrastructures like this? How hard is it to actually be able to know which cable to pull and where to damage it?
I mean, the potential that China and Russia are collaborating on putting pressure in these infrastructure attacks in remote subsea environments, I think it's very real. Russia, in particular, has been basically developing technologies and methods for this for many years. They have a subsea special mission directorate called GUGI, G-U-G-I, that they have been developing for decades, basically to do this exact thing, to use seabed warfare against infrastructure and either damaging infrastructure or in some cases tap into those infrastructure for intelligence purposes. But we've certainly seen signs of this in the Baltic Sea region, and concerns about these sort of possible Russian intelligence gathering vessels in and around renewable energy infrastructure, in and around telecommunications infrastructure, and the like, from the Barents Sea to the North Sea to the Baltic Sea. And again, some of these same sort of vessels, I was in Taiwan about 6 months ago and also in Japan. And while I was there, I was watching some of the same vessels I've been concerned with over the years in the European context, sailing in East Asian waters, right? Russian flag vessels that are actually, supposedly, hydrographic research vessels, but are widely understood to actually be operating for intelligence purposes. I think this is turning into a global phenomenon. I don't think this is just in the Baltic Sea or just in the Cross Strait region. And I think that authorities really need to put this in the front of mind in terms of not only increasing monitoring through things like surface vessels and subsea drones and things like this, but also through increasing multi-wavelength commercial satellite coverage of offshore environments. I think oftentimes commercial satellite providers deprioritize offshore environments because there's less of a market for people buying them. Then there also has to be a direct discussion and basically a partnership between energy and telecommunications providers that operate the offshore subsea infrastructure, and those commercial satellite providers, to make sure that they know, no, actually, there is something interesting there. We would like to pay money to buy that imagery. Please prioritize it, because that's a very small price to pay compared to economic costs of outages and things like this, but also a political and security cost, where it's basically undermining democratic resilience in some case, because it undermines the confidence that an adequate response can be mounted. And the subsea cable locations are on maritime charts, right? They have to be, because ships that don't want to put down an anchor and break one of these cables by accident need to know roughly where they are. So there's kind of a give and take with the security of these systems. But I think that what we've seen in recent weeks does not necessarily require a reconnaissance, advanced technologies. Put down an anchor and drag it for tens or hundreds of kilometers. That's what we've seen in the Baltic Sea. And you'll be pretty sure that you're going to snag one or more of these cables,
right?
Because you can see them on a maritime chart.
Okay, so one last question, and this is actually the big question for you, is that from the layman's perspective, it seems like we're in the 21st century. Internet has advanced quite a lot over the last couple of decades, and yet we are still highly dependent on subsea cables to connect countries. Are there any ways or any technologies being worked on right now to not have such a physical connection? Or are there any ways around this sort of, I would say, gray zone activities, or as you called it, just outright hybrid warfare activities?
Well, look, I think that there's two ways. There's a policy way and a technology way to go about this. Number one, I think in the European context, I have briefed NATO at NATO headquarters just a few weeks ago. I've also called for this before US Congress in testimony back in September. I think that NATO, in particular, to respond to these subsea infrastructure attacks that have been seen increasing over the past few years since Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine began, all across European waters, that there needs to be NATO Article 4, which is not Article 5, meaning there's not a military response, but there has to be an Article 4 consultative mechanism where publicly the NATO alliance comes out and says, we know what you're doing, we know why you're doing it, and we will respond, taking this incredibly seriously. Unfortunately, that has not yet been done, and I think in part due to some parts of the NATO alliance not wanting to, quote unquote, escalate the situation vis-a-vis Russia. But in this case, non-response has only emboldened actors like Russia. And I think that China looks at that as well and sees a non-significant response to these incidents. And that's why we've seen, this happen in and around Taiwan as well. In terms of the technical side, yes, I think building redundancy is the number one thing. I think building the capacity, Taiwan really, I think, needs to continue to build its capacity for subsea cable repair because it's an island nation, right? The geography of Taiwan is such that there are simply going to be more connections to the outside world via subsea infrastructure, either domestically produced cable repair vessels in Taiwan or sharing such vessels between the Republic of Korea, Japan, and the Philippines, for example. I think that's really important because the faster that those vessels can be dispatched to fix these cables, the more that the public can be reassured that their authorities are taking this seriously. And then finally, yeah, unfortunately, we still these are going to be really main arteries of the global internet for time to come. Now, we have distributed satellite constellations that are allowing for things like, looking at Elon Musk's Starlink and others that are being built. Those certainly have a role to play, but we're talking about massive high bandwidth trunk lines of the global internet infrastructure. And so far, satellite internet simply doesn't have the bandwidth to fully replace those. And so we're going to be stuck with them for some time. So we need security and defense that matches the importance of these subsea cables.
Yeah, I was going to ask exactly about that. How far are we from the literal pie in the sky idea coming from Elon Musk and the like, to use satellite such as the Starlink system to connect the world? Is there anything you want to talk about, or have we kind of sort of covered our grounds for this particular incident?
No, only to say that this is not the first time that Taiwan has encountered this. There's been many of these sort of incidents in recent years, in particular to the Matsu Islands. We saw that in 2023. And so I think that the Taiwanese authorities acted very quickly and professionally in responding to this. They dispatched a Coast Guard vessel that actually got out to the vessel in question, the Qingchun 39, but due to weather couldn't board it, and they've immediately called on the Republic of Korea to either impound or board or investigate the vessel, whatever they can do, should this vessel actually go and dock at the port of Busan, which is what it's claiming that it's going to do, at least on AIS. Now, because of that and because of the interest in this particular vessel, I would be shocked if it actually showed up in Busan. But it may well do, but I would be kind of surprised if it would do that. My guess would be that it will go to a Chinese port and not visit Taiwan or Korea or Japan or anywhere else in the region anytime soon.
Yeah, these sort of gray zone activities are starting to intensify over the years, especially since the turn of the year. So thank you so much for your time. And that concludes our conversation with Professor Benjamin Schmitt. As you may have noticed, these gray zone activities have increased in intensity starting in the year 2025 or maybe even late 2024. We'll continue to update you on any of these occurrences here on the show and hopefully find experts who can give us insight into the intentions, economic and socio impacts behind these behaviors, and hopefully help to unravel the geopolitics of the Indo-Pacific region. I have been Joey Chou, and this is Beyond the Reefs on Radio Taiwan International.